Hi, welcome to the second day at the Foreign Exchange Expo here at Dubai. My name is Josh Mahony, Chief Market Analyst at Scope Markets. I'm joined today here by Tony Cross here, the armchair trader. And I thought, given the fact that we're here in Dubai and it's a key growth region for ourselves at Scope Markets, I thought this would be a good opportunity to kick off the day's event with a focus on Abu Dhabi, on Dubai. We have two new products that are being offered at the moment. We've got the Dubai Indices, we've got the Abu Dhabi Indices. They give you particular access to stocks within the region, to particular sort of growth regions within the world, coming at a key moment in time, certainly in terms of the possibility for people to want to look further than just US indices. And I thought who better than to ask you to discuss this. You covered the topics pretty keenly, but out a daily note to talk about some of the big movers within the area. So let's talk about the area as a whole. We'll talk about these indices, what they might offer to potential traders, then talk about some of these different stocks that people are interested in and what people in this region actually like to trade themselves. Because as much as we like to talk about very regional specific stuff, generally there's a common theme throughout people around the world, and that kind of follows through to people within this region as well in terms of what they like to trade aside from that. So let's kick off first and foremost with this idea of what are we looking at within these indices, and what kind of thing do we gain by having access to these indices that perhaps we wouldn't necessarily have from some of the other indices.
It's an interesting point, Josh. Thanks for having me on. The key point I've picked up over the last few months, looking at the index performance in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, has been the lack of correlation with the wider global markets. We've seen some very big moves, especially in Asia in the last few weeks. That hasn't been translated here. And this is a repeated situation. Big swings in Europe on uncommon, even in the US off the back of those rate moves. Big swings there. A typical big day's move in this part of the world is 1%. And that's, that's an outlier. That sits very nicely on top of longer term trends that we've also been discussing for these indices. So I think it presents a very unique opportunity in terms of if you want to try and trade a trend. These are markets you probably want to have a look at. And where Scope have done so well here is that, you're first to market with these CFD products. Anyone anywhere in the world who can open a CFD account can now get economic exposure to the Abu Dhabi or to proxies for the Abu Dhabi and the Dubai indices as a whole in a very low cost, easy to access way.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because it comes into this sort of debate of, what are the key things when it comes down to trading? And arguably for me, part of it is like picking the right market is arguably more important than having this perfect trading strategy. Because arguably you want to try and find things that are relatively predictable and relatively long-lasting trends. We were looking at the charts for these two markets, the Abu Dhabi market pulling back more so in the past year. But generally, we do see sort of long sweeping trends that when you see these pullbacks, generally they're bought up. And we're talking about the sort of geopolitical tension within the region at the moment. If you see a little bit of weakness, certainly within the Abu Dhabi index, that's just playing into that wider theme that's been lasting over the last year. Whereas with the Dubai index, really, you're talking about a long-standing multi-year uptrend that when we do see these pullbacks, generally people see that as an opportunity to buy the dip.
I think that's correct. Yeah, I mean, the situation there post-COVID, both indices dipped, as happened globally, off the big shutdown in March 2020 from COVID. We saw Abu Dhabi gains over the following 2.5 years, and then that plateau, slight trend lower. Dubai, it's still heading north. That trajectory is very much in play.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're going to try to separate the two, I would arguably say if you're looking at Dubai, you have more of a focus on maybe some of the sort of more tourism side of things, perhaps a little bit more expansive away from energy. Within Abu Dhabi, you do have two major oil players. We've got ADNOC and the Abu Dhabi National Energy Company. So within that, you're going to have a little bit more exposure to the energy side of things, which is certainly a key part of it. if we're looking at the sort of sectors that people are looking at within this, I guess, what type of areas are going to be the mainstay? You'd be talking maybe real estate. You're talking about finance in particular.
Finance, yeah. I mean, the prevalence, the size of the banks comparative to other components in the index is notable. So yeah, banks, real estate, they both stand out as dominant sectors here.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, if you're trading it, you'll be wanting to try and find very nice sort of trends. But then if you're looking for a sort of investment, you want to know that these kind of businesses have high growth opportunities. And certainly, you know, coming from London, you know, I know that we're sort of relatively constrained in terms of our sort of real estate opportunities when you're talking about the house builders, because there's only just so much space.
Yeah.
And certainly when you come to Dubai, it grabs you that it almost feels limitless, right? Yes. There's a lot of space around there. You can keep expanding into it. And there's also the story about expansion into other regions around it. You know, you're talking about Saudi Arabia certainly becoming a major talking point of late, and the sort of shift in mentality within that area. And certainly I would say when it comes to UAE, whether it's Abu Dhabi, whether it's Dubai, some of these companies certainly have a lot of experience in terms of being able to build to a very high quality and do so very quickly. And certainly that would lend itself to expansion within the region, where they can look beyond the shores of their immediate sort of region and actually look to these other areas that are looking to expand as well.
Absolutely. And I think obviously the other point that, where Stoke is, positioning itself very well in the region is the offering of individual, single stock CFDs as well as the index plays. So if you want to go, well, I like the look of that real estate developer or that bank or that energy company or that telco, get involved. It's the opportunities there.
Yeah, certainly. And it's interesting because I guess this is coming into a point in time where we've finally seen the pivot from these central banks. The currency here is pegged to the US dollar. So you do have that same kind of knock-on impact where we start to see interest rates coming down globally. That, of course, starts to make it easier to borrow. It makes mortgages easier. It makes people start to think that the real estate sector is ready to boom once again.
I think that there may be a caveat here for the region, as we've seen a whole string of IPOs over the last few years, massively oversubscribed. There's an awful lot of capital sitting on the sidelines, uninvested. Yeah. So I think and I've seen this watching the price action on the indices when we get that news or those smoke signals, if you like, from the Fed as to what might happen next. You see big moves on Wall Street. That's not being mirrored over here, despite the currencies being pegged. Yeah. So I think there is a very, very interesting play out there.
It definitely feels a lot sort of less like it's getting huge swings up and down, and a lot more stable in the trends. And certainly that appeals to me. Each trader has their different perspective. Someone just wants like huge whipsaws and they can try and take advantage of that on a minute chart or something like this. Whereas when you see these stocks, generally they have sort of very strong growth prospects, and therefore, maybe you don't necessarily get the same kind of liquidity that you might get with, say, a major US stock. So you get those trends, but you might not necessarily get as huge a volatility. Would that be correct if you're looking at what you're seeing?
I think the liquidity is definitely the lack of liquidity on some stocks is definitely a factor, and that obviously does feed into at times what can look like slightly more erratic price movement. We do, however, have some stocks that are fairly liquid. Apex Investment is one that's caught my eye over the last few months. Abu Dhabi listed investment company. Big move up in September. They made a very interesting JV play in terms of the green energy storage. Was that the only driver? I don't know. It's the only one I can find. But so an actively traded stock that is making a big move off what appears to be a strong fundamental. Similarly, Salik, the tollgate company, they announced a revaluation of the revenues from one or two of their toll gates at the end of August. Big move in prices after that. It's all there for the taking.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I guess if you're talking about potential expansion in the region, and generally that's what people are looking to take advantage of, right? When they're investing, certainly, You look at the real estate, that's certainly glaring. It stares at you in the face when you come into the region. The kind of expansion is going on. Yesterday, I'm taking a taxi. I look up, there's 3 whole new skyscrapers just being built in front of me. And it really does strike you. But the flip side of that is that all of this expansion needs to be financed. And so the banking sector is particularly key to all of this. It's not only just a play on interest rates, it's also a play on the development within the region. And when it's a high growth region, it's obviously you need a lot of lending to be able to undergo these huge multi-million-pound projects. So the big banks also play a key role going forward for people looking to invest.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I guess interest rates at the time, at the moment, the way that we're looking at it, it's a very interesting one, because certainly when we're talking about, say, US banks, you have this move between, say, lower interest rates, potentially cut back on margins. But at the same time, it talks about when you're cutting interest rates, you're going to get a sort of higher economic growth, and you see that sort of pro-growth prospect. So people are a little bit stuck between knowing whether they should be bullish about the idea that rates are being cut and growth is going to be stronger going forward, or whether lower rates bring lower margins in turn. Interestingly enough, you also have the sort of Islamic side of banking out here as well, which maybe relies less on the interest rate side of things. So certainly, I think the banking is not only within this region, but certainly globally right now, is certainly going to come into the limelight. And the whole move that we've been seeing recently in terms of equity markets, sort of trying to gauge whether we're going to get a hard landing, a soft landing, or no landing at all.
Yeah.
That really feeds into perception of strength within the financials at the moment, because you're talking about sort of bad loans and the like. So certainly if we can get into that sweet spot where we're focusing more on global growth, but we don't necessarily see that big downturn in terms of sort of recessions happening in the US, happening in Europe, then that could be a really good position for the financials right now.
Well, it could. I mean, I do wonder what the appetite would actually be, though, for a bank from this region to be getting too invested overseas, because the growth here is so strong and so dynamic. Why look any further than because obviously the one of the big issues you face, obviously you mentioned the correlation with net interest margin, but the delinquency, the write downs that the UK and the US banks are reporting all the time, a big liability on the sheet.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I guess if we sort of move on to the idea of, what do people like to trade within this region as a whole, it's not only UAE stocks.
Well, it's not UAE stocks. It's the opposite, that your classic trader in the GCC wants to be trading the Dow, wants to be trading oil, wants to be trading gold. Now, I think part of that is just that's how it's always been. Historically, you haven't had that ability to get easy access from a single account into multiple different assets. But the world has moved on a lot. It goes back to think about 10, 15 years ago, where, to have 20 currency pairs on a proprietary platform would be, run of the mill stuff. Whereas now you can trade thousands and thousands of assets all from a single provider. So I think there is I can see why people do it, because obviously there's an awful lot of information out there. The price action is typically very well telegraphed on those very popular, very liquid assets. But, there's an awful lot more out there. And, some of the opportunities are literally on their doorstep.
Yeah. And in a way, the people within the region are trading like everyone else around the world, right? You look out for some of these sort of major markets, like you're talking about oil and gold. These are also some of the main markets for our clients all across the globe. And so it's not necessarily surprising. But certainly from my perspective, I care less about what the name of my market is. I care more about how it's trading and the direction and reliability of the trend. And certainly, as we allude to, these are markets that do have some really interesting trends within it. Yeah. And as they become more liquid, they'll likely become more attractive for traders and investors going forward.
I think that's right. Big indication need here. Over 10,000 instruments to be looking at. It's very difficult to know where to start. But I think, I would urge people to look more closely at the price action, both on the local indices and some of those bigger stocks.
Lovely. Well, I think we're going to draw that to a close. We've got a whole host of different topics we're going to be covering. I'm going to be interviewing different people. We're talking about commodities, we're talking about gold, the US economy, we're talking about China. So make sure to follow us over the course of the day today. But that's it for this first session. We're talking about the UAE here with Tony Cross, the armchair trader. Thanks a lot. Make sure to follow us over the course of the day. Thank you.